Nancy Cook is a White House reporter for Politico. She joins me now. Okay, Nancy, boy, do they have a tight timeline here. You know what really caught my attention, Nancy, was Senator John Kennedy. He said that there'll be some cheesecake and some spinach with this deal, meaning compromise and some sweeteners added in. How exactly is the White House working with Congress these days?
Well, the White House really isn't getting into the spinach, as you called it. They're really focused on the salesmanship of it. And so they're putting the president out there. They're putting Ivanka Trump. They're putting OMB Director Mick Mulvaney, Vice President Michael Pence, the Treasury Secretary. They're putting them out there to try to build momentum for tax reform and help people make the case. But they're leaving a lot of the spinach and the policy decisions really to the Hill to focus on. And the Hill has had a really hard time figuring out how to raise enough money to offset the big tax cuts that they want to put in this bill.
Nancy, you wrote that Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin's background may actually kind of complicate things for the White House and their influence on tax reform, the debate there. He's a Wall Street guy. What do you mean by all that?
Well, the thing is that he has had a great relationship with the president dating back to the campaign. He joined in spring of 2016. He and the president remain quite close. But the thing is that he's a Wall Street guy. He's not a Washington guy. And he's had a very difficult time creating and maintaining relationships on the Hill, particularly with House Republicans. And that could be tricky because he has become one of the administration's primary spokespeople and salespeople for tax reform. And yet House Republicans don't really love working with him.
You know, House Speaker Paul Ryan joked yesterday that the president won't be able to object to a full tax bill because he'll actually be in Asia next week. Okay, there's some daylight between the White House and Republicans in Congress. Is there concern that he could possibly undermine the process by tweeting while he's in Asia?
Well, I was up on the Hill on Monday night and I talked to a number of senators, and there was a feeling that they were disappointed, for instance, that the president tweeted against one of their ideas, which is to raise revenue by changing the way that 401k money is taxed. But there was also a sense on the Hill that they were willing to sort of go it alone and develop this policy themselves. And there was a hope that the president would really maintain the salesman role and not necessarily take up the policy. And I think that there's a hope that, you know, him being gone in Asia wouldn't necessarily be the worst thing because it will mean that he won't step on them policy-wise.
I want to, meanwhile, take a closer look at the week ahead. Defense Secretary Mattis is currently in Asia, where he actually visited the demilitarized zone between North Korea and South Korea. The president, when our Major Garrett pressed him on it, the president said that it'll be a surprise. He wouldn't say exactly what he was going to do. So what are the arguments for and against him visiting?
Well, I think really the whole trip, or really a huge thrust of the trip, is just making sure that North Korea doesn't necessarily have a huge nuclear buildup, and making sure that the allies that he's going to meet with throughout Asia sort of have the U.S.'s back, and that everyone is on the same page on this nuclear question. You know, the pros for him visiting is that he could try to build relationships with North Korea and do that. The cons, of course, is that that's a very tricky diplomatic situation. The president hasn't necessarily done a huge number of these trips. You know, he doesn't have a lot of foreign policy experience. And so the concern, of course, is that he could sort of stumble into making a diplomatic gaffe just because he's not well versed in these situations.
What else will you be looking for during that trip?
Well, I think that there's going to be a bunch of questions also that come up with trade. The president pulled out of the TPP agreement, and there's a real question of how the White House is going to approach their trade policy. The president made a lot of campaign promises on the campaign that said that he would really take a very hard line towards trade. But the White House so far hasn't really developed a coherent trade policy. And so I think that will be another major thing to watch on the trip.
Nancy Cook, great to have you on. Nancy, thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much.